Hi guys, Mike here. Thanks for tuning in. So, as you probably already have seen in the length of this video, this is going to be a huge one. I did a full in-depth mix breakdown of the song Magenta and Gold from the band Phorm, where I worked as a mixing engineer for the band. It was a request by the band initially that I wanted to show them what I did, like really step by step, and then we talked about that I can share this with the public. So I made the video where I addressed you as a viewer and listener. I will really go step by step on each and every single track, not only showing you what I did, like which plugins I used, but also why I did stuff. When I was looking kind of like those videos, even the long ones in the past, it really always helped me to understand the vision of the mixing engineer and not only showing and seeing what he did, but the why, because this is way more important than just seeing someone turning knobs and then you hearing the end result. So the whole video is not really structured. I just like talk all the time. You find timestamps in the video so you can jump to the chapters, to the guitars and bass and the intro and the mix box processing and the drums and all that stuff. So still it is 2.5 hours. So please consider that. It's not edited the video. I didn't kind of like highlight any fancy stuff. I just hit the record button and recorded on 2 different days. But it's really about in-depth on this mix of Magenta and Gold. You find the link, of course, to the song in the description box below. Make sure you check them out. Amazing band, amazing song. Had a lot of fun working on that song and on some other songs which will be released this year. So, enough talking. Enjoy the video, the mix breakdown of Magenta and Gold by Phorm. And talk soon, guys. Bye. So welcome to the session here of Magenta and Gold. Before I start showing what I did exactly on a track basis, so this is going to be really in-depth, let me quickly show you how I set up the session. Here in the edit window or the track window, you see all the audio files. You don't see the drums here because I use Superior Drummer and it's happening inside the software, and I decided to keep the software open in case I want to make minor adjustments on the fly during the song. The preset the drummer Michael picked here was quite decent already. Of course I had to change it a little bit, but just in case I kept the software open. Even it means that my RAM and CPU was quite heavily used during the mixing process, but that's fine. So you see here it starts with the bass. I talk about the colors in a second. Then all the guitars are blue, kind of like we have some effects tracks going on, and all the red and reddish colors are usually vocals. So, and I like to put them in an order that is kind of like a flow. So what gets first or what happens first in the song, usually I start with that, even though sometimes the session from the band in this case wasn't meant to be prepared that way, but I kind of like combined some tracks which I thought belonged together. The original session I got from the band was more, let's say, unstructured because they just recorded their parts, which is fine, and then it was my task kind of like to combine things that belong together so I don't need to process 5 different guitar tracks which basically sound the same or use the same amp. So that took some time, but that's fine. The song is rather complex with several layers of sounds. It's an amazing kind of like talented band, and they think complex, they have complex arrangements. So not always is a song just like straightforward 4 instruments and 3 minutes. But in the end, for me as a mixing engineer, it doesn't make any difference if I mix like a 3-piece band or a complex song like that, because the basic idea stays the same. So this is how the track is set up for me. You see I cut the vocals like just like the pieces where Carlos was singing. I doubled some things. I don't want to show you the original template or the record that they showed me in Logic, which looked differently, but this is where I started with the mix, and you see some of the lines here, automation. I talk about this everything in a moment. So here is the mix window. Again, everything in orange is drums. Then we have those 5 bass guitar tracks. Sometimes I split the tracks because I want to emphasize certain parts. It's sometimes easier when you know that, let's say, an instrument, in this case the bass, is really crucial and key to a certain part of the song. Instead of just like automating effects, bypassing them and bringing them back in, I split the signal and I name it in this case like bass intro or bass bridge, so I can process this individually. It's easier for me to kind of like stay in the big picture of the song, and you will hear the word big picture quite a lot in this video, I promise. So the guitars, I did two decisions here to separate the guitars because the guitars were really kind of like over the top. There was like, I think just 70 tracks, individual tracks just recording guitars, probably too much. So I had to find out a way how to make it comprehensive, yet still let's say respecting the musical arrangement idea from the band. So what I did, what made it easy for me, is I distinguished here on the track basis between the two guitar players, which are called Andy and Mark. So everything in dark blue is Andy. He's playing, for instance, the solo and some lead guitar parts. And this light bluish green effect is Mark, the second guitar player. And this one purple track here is called Mark FX because there's kind of like a certain part in the song where he used some crazy effects on the guitar, which I kept completely. All the other tracks, this was another task I had to do when they recorded their tracks in Logic. And maybe I show a screenshot of the session they sent me. They used, of course, all the effects that come along with Logic, including reverb and delay and all that stuff. So sometimes when you play and record, you want to hear the effect already while recording. But of course, for me or for a mixing engineer, it's sometimes difficult to use those effects, usually because you think differently. You want to combine different instruments into one delay. So I had to remove all the effects the guys picked in Logic. But some of them I kept. For instance, this effects guitar. So that's the reason I highlighted it, and it's kind of like it's too strange of an effect, not a straight guitar. So I treated this separately. Then we have three different vocal tracks here from Carlos, like the main vocals, which runs through the song. Then I created a double, which is called lead vocal para, so parallel, which I will show you I heavily distorted and compressed a lot, so to bring up the vocal even more. Then I have this separate tag, which is called lead vocal last chorus, because then everything is like the whole song is exploding, so I needed even more energy on that. Then we have some parts in the bridge section or right before the solo. You will hear this is really special. We have the harmony vocals in the outro, and then this is a group basically. I can show you all the channels that's split up here. You see those are all the background vocals, which were called Yeah, and I combined them into a group, so don't need to treat them individually. But I treated them as a group. And then there's one part where he's singing Save You, which I wanted to emphasize even more because this stands out. Save You is a repeating pattern throughout the song. You hear the word Save You quite a lot because it's part of the lyrics, but this part was crucial to the arrangement, and that's the reason I separated this just one Save You, which he sang even again to emphasize this and to get it a little additional treatment. So everything in green is effects channels or RFX channels, so all the halls and reverbs and plates and delays and everything, and you see I named them for the effect that I used. So this is, for instance, called hook melody hall plate. Then we have a snare and a tom reverb and a drum plate. Then we have Bob reverb because the plugin is called after the engineer Bob Clearmountain, which he developed the plugin, so on and so forth. And by the way, every time you see this read here, which means that there's some sort of automation going on that particular track, and of course you can automate effects as well. And finally, this is part of my template. Let's call this 6 tracks here. Those are buses. So here are all the drums combined, and they get additional treatment as well. All the bass tracks. Then I separated on the track bass, you remember, I separated between Andy and Mark, so the 2 guitar players. But here I decided to separate between rhythm and melody guitars. It's a different approach because usually rhythm guitars get a certain, let's say, same treatment, because usually they sound quite of similar. So I wanted to treat them overall with the same processing in case I need to. There's not much stuff processing going on the bass level here, but that's the idea behind it. Combining everything that's a rhythm part, and here combining everything that's a melody part or has melody implement elements to it. And of course the vocals, and those 5 buses here, they go to the submix, and you see the treatment on the submix, or call it the master out. I usually don't put anything on my master output. I call it submix, so I can treat it and put plugins on it. Usually I leave the master bus completely on its own. I don't even touch the fader. So that's what I did here, and we have, or in this case, I put the already mastered song, because you know the song's already been released. I put the final mix and master, so the version you hear on Spotify and YouTube, on this master track, so I can jump back and forth. And in the end, when I'm done with the mix session, I'm gonna of course play the whole song, so you can compare where we started and then what's the final result. And here on the listen bus, that's a new feature that Presonus, the manufacturer who is making Studio One, my DAW of choice, implemented. That's a cool feature. The listen bus allows you to put some, let's say, plugins to listen to reference tracks, to measure loudness, all that stuff. And every single plugin you put on the listen bus is not affecting the main stereo output. So I can do some crazy stuff here and render the track or print it down to audio, and those plugins won't be affect the track. So it's kind of like a parallel track. So this is just what you listen to, but it's not affecting the track. So for an intro, let's start. Another thing, and I think I already mentioned it maybe in the intro part, is the way I gonna show you what I did here is kind of like counterintuitive to how I mix the song, or I mix songs, because I will now go starting with the drums and then the bass and then the guitars and then the vocals, so one after each other, so you see how the song gets built, and then I show you what I did on the buses, and then finally the last step, show you what I did on the submix bus. But that's not usually how I mix. I start with an overall balance, so I start with the drums, and like a quick mix after 20-30 minutes I have a first rough balance going on, and then I constantly jump between the tracks, because I always try to look at the big picture, which is the song, and I don't just like treat the drums and then treat just the bass and then treat just the guitars, because they affect each other. Sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you treat a rhythm guitar and then you feel like, oh, now the snare is being dug down or swallowed by the guitar, and you need to go back to the snare drum. So you get the point. For this video, because it doesn't make sense, because I cannot remember what I jump back between the tracks back and forth, I will go step by step, so you see this the song kind of like gets built from the start. So having that said, the drums. The drummer used Superior Drummer, which I appreciate because I love the software as well, and you know my channel is quite a lot about Superior Drummer. He recorded his part. It was like during the lockdown in Germany in March and April, on the Roland TD50, so high-end electronic drum kit, and he sent me the MIDI performance and the whole session basically, and he picked a preset. I think it was one of Michael Ilbert's default. I cannot remember which one. Now it's named Phorm, Magenta and Gold New. So because I did a new preset here, I changed a little bit and we tried different toms, because first I thought that this acrylic toms here, that they maybe sounded too big and too hollow, kind of like, but in the end we came back to those toms because they cut through the mix. I changed the snare, but that was pretty much it. I didn't change anything on the preset here, because Michael Ilbert is a fantastic engineer who recorded this expansion pack, so I didn't change anything here. All I did, and you see this on the output section here, I sent every single track that Michael Ilbert used for his preset out to my DAW. And you see on some tracks he just used, for instance on this mono low track, which is a mono microphone, he just used the kick and the snare and flipped the phase here on the kick. I didn't touch this at all. I just like routed everything out the preset as it was. He didn't use any processing on the output, so that helped me, so I could treat the drums just like they were recorded drums, because there are actually recorded drums. So and Occasionally I went back to Superior Drummer and changed a little bit maybe on velocity, but really small adjustments what fit to the song. So I keep Superior down now because it takes some CPU. And so you see all the tracks here which are routed to my DAW. The toms, and you see this little icon here, this little group icon here. So of course I combined all the toms here, the 3 toms, to one tom bus, just to make it a little bit more convenient to look at and to treat them as a group. So I won't show you every single EQ and compression step I did, but I'm talking about more why I did stuff and why it fits to the arrangement. So starting on the drums, so let's first, before we start, let's have a listen how they sound. No treatment going on whatsoever, so just listen 10 seconds, and what you basically hear is the preset for Michael Ilbert, which sounds already pretty nice. So starting with the kick drum, I start with the 1176, which is a famous compressor for drums due to the fast attack. I put the attack on kind of like almost slowish and fastest release. So this just gives the kick drum a little bit more punch and a little bit more attack, because there were so many guitars going on in this track. So I needed to work on the kick and snare, and of course always with the feedback of the band. It's not like that they sent me the tracks, I mixed it, and then we were done. It was a constant back and forth, because at the end of the day, and this is like a crucial thing that you need to understand as a mixing engineer, it's like, it's not your song, it's not your decision. Whatever the band wants you to do, mixing wise, just do it. You can come up with arguments why something might not work, you know, but usually it's their song, it's their idea, it's their visualization, it's their kind of like vision of a song, and your job is just to try to make the best out of it. So let's listen what the CLA 76 is doing to the kick drum. Let's solo it here for now. Of course, it's adding volume, and I know people saying like, yeah, you should match volume. No, I shouldn't, because mixing always means a track gets louder, so you have to deal with it. This is sometimes you use the output trim of a plugin to put in some gain and not always the fader, so that's part of the process. After that, my favorite plugin, which I used on every single track basically, this is the Solid State Logic, so SSL E-Console, the famous E-Console. I just like the sound. It adds a little bit of analog character and even sometimes some hiss, so some background noise, but you can adjust this. Basic EQ moves, adding some high-end shelf, adding 2 dB at 5 kilohertz, so that's where the attack of the beater from the kick drum is sitting. So to emphasize this a little bit, I removed almost 6 dB here at 250, which is a common move for a kick drum. Sometimes there's kind of like some mud, and in 250 hertz area, there's usually where some rhythm guitars are happening, where Carlos' vocal was sitting, like the low notes in his voice, and of course the snare. So cleaning up that area helps to give other elements more room to kick through. And I think I barely touched, just 0.5 dB on 50 hertz, so a little bit of oomph down there, and rolling off some stuff below 30 hertz because you don't need it anyway. No compression because I had this 1176. So let's listen how this sounds. So you clearly hear more attack going on. Continuing with the snare, the same approach here. The Solid State Logic plugin, SSL E-Console, rolling off some stuff, again adding some attack here at 4 kilohertz. Again, a high shelf, 2.5 kilo dB at 8 kilohertz. This is a shelf where you just boost the high end, which helps the snare to cut through a little bit more, and 2 dB at 200 hertz. That's where usually the body of the snare sits. So let's listen how this sounds. Oops, I should solo the snare, of course. I will now bring in each and every instrument, one each other, so we won't listen to some stuff in solo, just maybe to show you some details, but it's kind of like I want to show you how the song gets built and gets louder and bigger and more pieces coming into. Mixing is always about taking decisions in the context of the song, and usually you have to have a starting point. This is usually the drums, but I will keep the drums open through the rest of the video, so to see, especially when we come to the guitar and the bass guitar, why I did something, because I used the drums as a reference point. So after that, I used this great guy. This is called the Black Box Analog Design. This is an actual hardware unit which they modeled as a plugin, and it's amazing. It adds gain, volume, it adds harmonic distortions and saturation. It's just magic. I don't think I used a preset here. No, I didn't. I just played with the saturation knob here in the top, in the bottom left corner, some tube saturation, some air. It's just an amazing plugin. You will hear when I switch it on here what this does to the snare. So it's really kind of like a little lift up even more in the high end. And then finally, the virtual mix rack, where I just use basically a compressor, and you see fast attack, fast release time, which sometimes people don't do this because you will kill transient. But after all the processing, I had the feeling that I just needed to control the peaks of the snare just a little bit. And you will see that the needle of this compressor is just kind of like just touching 1 dB. It's kind of like just taking control of the peaks of the snare drum. So you see every time the snare hit just like 1 dB, it's tucking down, it's just like taking control of the piece. And then I sent the snare into a snare plate. So let me go to the effects here, and on the snare plate I used this great plugin, which is called Bob Clearmountain's Domain. It's an amazing plugin. It's a combination, I use this quite a lot on this track. It's a combination of reverb and delay and pitch shifting and modulation and everything in one plugin. One of the most expensive plugins I've ever bought, but this is really crazy. And Bob Clearmountain was the engineer, or is the engineer, who mixed Born in the USA, for instance. So he created a preset that copied this famous iconic snare drum from Born in the USA. I used that preset, tweaked it quite a bit, but I wanted to create that effect. The rooms that Michael picked for his drums is already big and vibey, but I just wanted to add a little bit more reverb to the snare, and this gated reverb sound from the 80s I think fitted perfectly. So here's the snare drum with this plugin enabled. Snare bottom, don't need to talk about this. It's just like some basic EQ here, nothing really crazy, just some high end and some low end going on. So now let's talk about, and you see on those 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks, 5 tracks, I didn't do anything, because I just, as I said, the preset from Michael Ilbert from Superior Drama sounds already so good, and I didn't want to overthink it. Just like I just left it as it was, and I only played with the levels you see, because the faders are at different levels. So I bring them all in one, so you can really hear how this lifts the whole drum track. Then we have this compression channel here, which I think is no, it's just one track. And I combined, I think when I remember correctly, I combined, yes, you see here the mono low, the comp 1178, and the mono comp, those 3 tracks, which all kind of like dealt with compression within Superior Drama, I sent to one track in my DAW and treated it as a whole, as a kind of like a group, but in the DAW it just appears as one track. So that's what you can do. And all the thing I did here is really, again, adding a little bit of top end here, because the song has a dark feeling, so I wanted to do the drums to shine above. And rolling off some low end, because I had the feeling that it was too much low end going on in the area here between below 50 Hertz, and I wanted to have the bass drum and the kick drum to have more energy down there. So let's bring this guy in. Then the overhead stereo microphone, which is just a common overhead microphone. Again, just a little bit, 2 dB on 200 Hertz, adding something body to the snare in the room microphones, and again a little shelf on the upper higher range between 7 and 8 kilohertz. So just a tiny bit of processing here. And then I come to the drum plate in a second. The right I didn't touch. The right has just just a direct microphone on the right to capture the right cymbal here. And on the toms, let me quickly open the 3 tracks that related. All of the tracks got basic treatments. So I just show you one here, the floor tom 2. Again, some high shelf, emphasizing the attack at around 5 kilohertz, removing some boxiness, which usually occur in 300 to 600 hertz on toms, sometimes 700, 800. In this case, it was the 300 area. A lot of guitars playing there in that area as well. So that's kind of like a typical smile EQ curve on toms, what I did, and rolling off some low end as usual. I don't do this high pass filter on every single track, but usually it's a good advice to roll some stuff off, because down in 50 and below, you don't need anything. It's just often junk, and it clutters and it messes up the low end, which you need for the kick drum and for the bass guitar, for instance. So here are the toms. And then, let me close the toms here again. And then on the toms, overall processing for the drums, some compression, and some lift here, high end and low end, and then bring down the gain a little bit with this trimmer plugin, because in the compression and in this EQ setting here, I added some gains, so I just like to control it, and to compensate for that, I brought down the volume. So let's bring this in. Again, let me repeat this. Now you think, that's not too much of a big difference, Mike. But it's like, as I said in the beginning, this is all the stuff that I do usually in context of the whole song. So you will see how it makes sense when we come to the end of the song. But right now you maybe think not much of a difference, but you will see what I mean in the end. I forgot the kick sub microphone. I didn't touch this at all. So I think now we are done. No. Let me solo the toms here for a moment so you can better hear what I did on the tom. I thought the toms needed a little bit more reverb, so instead of sending it to the snare plate, which was this gated reverb effect from the 80s, the toms didn't sound that good when I used that effect. So what I did, I sent the toms to this dedicated reverb here, which is first an EQ. This is usually using a EQ before or after reverb, just to clean it up and to focus on the important area. So usually rolling off low end and rolling off some high ends to push it a little bit more in the background. When you cut off some high ends, you push things in the back. The more high end you have, like something like 2, 3, 4, 5 kilohertz, our brains perceive the signal to be nearer. So that's kind of like a trick sometimes to push things even more in the background. And then I used this plugin from Stephen Slade. I think it was a preset tom space, but you see the little star here above this dot. This means that I changed the plugin or the preset settings here a little bit to have it fit in the mix. So let's listen how the tom sounds in this reverb. And without. And with. So it's just a little bit more kind of like to expand the delay, the sustain of the toms. And finally, the last third different effect I used, sending the overheads into a plate reverb or reverb in general. This is usually where I start with, because the overheads are the best microphones to capture the whole drum set as a whole. Room microphones are sometimes too washy, too far away, but overheads have usually a good picture and a good balance between every instrument. And sending just like a tiny amount of the signal from the overheads into an own reverb makes the drums immediately bigger without being too distinct when you use, for instance, on toms and snare. In this drum microphone, it worked in this case, but just like to give the overall drum set a little bit more room and space, send some overhead into a good reverb. Doesn't need to be that big, and all of a sudden the drums come alive. So Let me just enable this and go back to effects here, and here is the drum plates again. Some same move, you see, just like rolling off some high and low end, which cleans up the effect. And you see here I just used this preset which is called small wood room. We just have a decay of 0.8 seconds, so it's not that big. It's just like kind of like open up the drum a little bit. So let me quickly solo the overheads here so you see what I mean. And without. And with. And now the drums as a whole. And then now finally I switched back and forth between all the processing I did for the drums. Okay, cool. So now let's keep the drums in solo and let's go to the bass. So the bass was quite tricky, but it plays an important role in the song. And I remember we had the discussion with the band, I had the discussion with the band where they really pushed the bass to the limit, where I initially had the feeling it's too much bass going on, but in the end the band was right. So they had the right gut feeling that the bass really pushed the song, especially when the bass kicks in, which I'm going to show you now. And I'm gonna lead you. This is the moment when the drummer Michael plays the first tom fill, and it's kind of like going from the first into the second verse. The bass kicks in, and you see we have 1, 2, 3 different bass tracks here to really emphasize this this part. And let me just, and you immediately hear the energy that's going on, even without any processing going on here on the bass track. So let me just show you how this sounds without no processing whatsoever. So let me start with the basic bass track that we started with. So I use this plugin, and sometimes I'm a fan of those signature plugins. This is from Chris Lord Alge, the famous mix engineer. He has a bunch of plugins for bass and drums and vocals and all that stuff. And sometimes it doesn't sound that bad. Usually I don't use it because it has kind of like less control and it has this predefined EQ curve going on. In this case, it just worked. So let me show you how this sounds when I bypass it and bring it back in just on the bass track here. So without. So you see he has the settings like upper, low and sub, and honk and bark and cut for the treble. You can add compression, push, spank and wall. Even some sub energy you can add additionally. Some distortion, which I pick the growl presets. It's just kind of like you don't think too much about like what's on the screen and how it's named. You just move the faders, listen to the song, and then you find a balance with saying, okay, now this works, and just close the plugin and continue. Don't think too much about the settings here. What we're gonna do now. The second track, which is basically just a copy of the first one, but I wanted to treat it differently. That's the reason we have 2 tracks. So I start with the 1176, which is a compressor. So in this case, in the first instance here, was this plugin that was dealing with the compression, and now I decided to take care of the compression on my own. So here's the compression for the doubled bass track. So let me jump here now. And you see the needle is barely moving. The reason for that is, and you always have to check, you see the bass part is rather consistent, but you have some jumps here where he's kind of like really hitting the strings with his fingers. But you see the, because he was already using some amps simulations in Logic when you record it. So you see here that the signal is quite consistent, so it was a consistent performance, but sometimes there were just the peaks going on, with sometimes like the noise from the strings when the finger hits the strings, and it creates more energy, electric energy in the bass guitar. And that's what I wanted to control with this compressor, which is the 1176, and this is usually very good in dealing with that because the attack time is really fast, so it really grabs those peaks. So let me jump here to the part where the peaks are a little bit jumping out, so you see what I mean. So you hear that when he's playing like dum 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 dum. So this was when the compressor is really starting to work to kind of like bring this down without killing it, because that's part of the song here when he's playing exactly this pattern. After that, decapitator, again, saturation, distortion, just like to bring it up, cut through the mix. And the biggest change I did here was this knob here in the middle, which is called tone. You have the chance to go dark and bright, which is just, I think, an internal EQ going on, but I pushed it quite heavily into the bright. So because I wanted to, especially that part when he's like, I wanted to treat the bass guitar not only to have this like fundamental bass frequencies going on the song, but especially because of the way Aaron played this bass, I wanted to push this signal even further, because it sometimes acts kind of like as a counter melody in the background, and you will hear it, what I mean when we talk about the guitars. And finally, sometimes just an EQ, after adding some stuff, you sometimes feel yourself that you need to EQ it a little bit, don't want to go too much into it, again emphasizing the high end and removing a little bit here at 148. It's usually a section where sometimes the bass can build up a little bit, so I just wanted to control that. Then we have the bass bridge part here, and let me jump to the bridge. That's the part, and you will hear the song, how it's gonna be developing over time. This is like really the part where the vocal, where Carlos was done, and you have like this 2-minute part of solo instrumental part, which sounds amazing and very complex. So we decided to treat the bass guitar here separately or additionally, and give them a little different, let's say, treatment. Another compressor, but with a different flavor, this LA2A, probably you guys know it, is kind of like a default compressor for vocals and bass guitars. It has a smoother reaction curve, so it has a fixed threshold attack release setting, and you just kind of like, it reacts more slowly and more even. That's the reason usually people use it on on bass guitars and vocals, and what I did here as well. And you see how the compressor is working. That's the reason I picked this. It's kind of like it's smoothing and leveling out the bass guitar even more here, because I thought in this part it was exactly needed that way. And then again, the solid state logic, E console, some basic EQ to emphasize what's already there. Did a quite drastic move here, 6 dB, removing at 360 again, and adding some low end here at 250. On this particular track. Sometimes and that's the reason I treat the bass differently here. I removed similar frequencies in the first part of the video, in the verses, but here I boosted it again because different instrumentation, the vocals weren't there anymore. So that's the reason sometimes you have to change and to let's say, structure your mind, because now the bass guitar needed really push, because some parts weren't there anymore. You have to react, and that's always what I kind of repeat. Always look at the big picture of the song, and treat not the instrument, but the instrument, how it helps and contributes most to the song, and that's what I did here. And often this stuff happens, of course, due to the feedback from the band when they're saying like, can you make the bass guitar a little bit louder or like a little bit more pushy forwards. And this is what you often face as a mixing engineer. You don't expect the band to always exactly tell you what you need to do, because they are not mixing engineers. That's the reason they hire you. So sometimes they use terms like, I want my instrument to be fatter or to be more noticeable or to have more this and that. And over time, you know and understand what they want to achieve. And then it's your task to use your tools you have at your disposal to make this happen. So bass intro, I talked about this already. I used this bass guitar to emphasize the beginning part here when the bass guitar is entering. And I used another instance of the Chrysalid algae, and you see different settings. Let me ping this here and show you the first instance. So this left here is the one I used on the main bass guitar track, and this used as a second instance. And you see I pushed this growl distortion, I pushed the compression, because I really wanted to push that part when it kicks in. So and you will hear immediately here when I enable this here how this adds to the song. It's a famous, most important part of the song, because then the song really like does the next step. And of course I use a volume automation in the end, you will see this, but this really contributes. And then there was this track which is called Bass Deep, and I will solo this for now, just a sec, so you really hear what this is all about. So let me unsolo this, so you just hear the bass deep. This was part of the recording. They wanted to implement that to that special part. Again, CLA bass, different settings. Let me bring this in here. And then this EQ, which is modeled after a Neve EQ, which is called VEQ3 in mono, again boosting almost 10 dB at 1.6. This is usually where the finger action or the attack of the finger on the strings is happening, and I really wanted to emphasize this by 10 dB with this plugin. So you hear what the jump when I enable this here. So that was the bass guitar. I will talk about the bus processing, what I did overall to the bass guitar, because I needed to adjust some things there as well, and to the drums and to everything when we come to the end of the track. So let me now, just as a summary, bass and drums so far, and I will bypass all the plugins and the effects on the tracks here and bring it in so you really see where we're coming. And again, the beginning here. Cool. So now let's go to the guitars. For the guitars, let me quickly go here to the track window as well. So the hook melody, or the song, is kind of like separated into several parts. For me, the first part of the overall song ends kind of like at the end of the second chorus. This is kind of like where the song is more straightforward. You have a classical separation between verse and chorus and pre-chorus and all that stuff, and then there's this break where the instrumental stuff is happening, and you see this here, that there's more guitar stuff going on. Before that, here from the start up to the end of the second chorus, you see it's kind of like a straightforward thing going on, and basically the hook of the song is Andy, which are called the Andy hook rhythm guitar, which is doubled left and right. And the song starts with another hook melody coming from Mark, and this is like what carries the song through the first two verses and choruses. So I wanted to treat them, and I started to jumping back and forth between those two guitars to make them fit in the mix. And the, let's say, the genius or the talent of the band really comes into play when you see what they add as counter melodies and additional melodies. But I'll show you step by step. So here first, starting the song with Mark on this rhythm guitar, no processing going on so far. So here, and he's playing this through to the middle of the pre-chorus, the first pre-chorus. Then he's changing to the strumming part, which I'm going to show you, and he's playing this similar idea. And this is where I comped, how do you call it? When you combined, you comp two tracks together, and I printed it differently so I can use this, because now here in the end of shortly before the next verse, he's playing the similar pattern again. So this is what kind of like makes the song for me undistinguishable and noticeable, and it the magic unleashes even more when you hear to Andy's second pair of hook guitar. Maybe it's not the right term for the band when they see the video right now, but for me it was kind of like, this is the hook of the song, at least when it starts. So let me jump here to the section when Mark is starting with his melody, and then when Andy kicks in, you see this here, the two guitar parts that are more panned left to right. I remember when they sent me the tracks, Mark recorded his part, so the first, when the song started, double take as well. So he had two different parts going on. So let me maximize the window here. So he had two parts as well, so both left and right. But I decided, and this is something that you can do as a mixing engineer, I thought that, because I wanted to separate those two parts from Andy and Mark, because for me it was so important and key to the sound of the song that I decided, of course, always asking the bands, to leave Mark's guitar as one track, so that's single performance, and Andy having double takes left and right. So it's, from a three-dimensional perspective, it's even more, let's say, distinguishable between the two performances. When you double take everything, you creating like a big just sound cloud that covers everything. So sometimes a good mix always lives from separation. So when something's loud, something needs to be quiet. When something's left, you need something on the right. And when you have something doubled, it's often better, especially on melody guitars and solo guitars, when you have just one track. So you want to create contrast, and that's what I tried to achieve here. Let me jump back to the mix window here, and you see I have Andy's guitar pans 75% left and right, but there's some automation going on when in some parts of the song the automation is happening that the guitars go 100%, so to widen up the track, I think when the chorus kicks in, but let me double check. So now what I'm going to do, I don't distinguish between rhythm and melody guitars. I just go one by one how the guitars occur in the track. So let me start with Mark's hook melody guitar. What I did here, some EQ, a digital EQ, Pro Q3 from FabFilter, because it's really precise and you can really like do, and I had a hard time to process those guitars. Don't know why, but there were some frequencies. I don't know if it was the guitars themselves or the amps they used, but I had to really like use some dynamic stuff, so really control the sound here. So let me bring this EQ in when Mark is playing. So it's especially this frequency here, what was really annoying. So let me quickly just, when you hear Mark's guitar, and I will solo this frequency, you will hear what I mean. So it's kind of like a ringing stuff, and when I boost this, and let me show you what I mean, you will really hear what I mean. So I assume you're listening on good headphones, so you will hear what I mean, and let me solo this frequency here. Okay, so now it's jumped back to somewhere where I don't want it to be, so let me bring it back again. So Afterwards, and on the guitars, I used quite some heavy reverb and delay effects because I didn't like the effects that were going on in Logic. So I created several different rooms and reverbs and delays for guitars. Usually when you want to have a cohesive sound, you sometimes try to use just 1 or 2 rooms so that it sounds they were recorded in one room. In this case, because the song is so complex and with different layers, I needed to use different things, but it didn't hurt the track or harm the track. So this I called the Hook Melody Hall, which is again the plugin from Bob Clemonton here. I started with the preset because Bob Clemonton, the engineer, was kind enough to share some of his presets from his iconic work he did. And for instance, he mixed Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones, and that's the preset or the sound he used for this famous Start Me Up guitar. Of course, I tweaked the preset. It usually never works when you just put it out, but it was a good starting point. So here's the Mark's guitar sending into this reverb. So let me just quickly jump to the hook melody here. It's here. Again, without. And the effect here, because I wanted, of course, some separation. The guitar you see from Mark is panned 30% to the left, so not straight in the middle, because I wanted to make some room in the middle for the bass drum and the bass guitar, of course. So the guitar is panned 30% to the left, but the reverb is panned 50% to the right, so not exactly 30%, not too symmetrical, is that a word? So I wanted to create this kind of like weird effect that the guitar is coming from here and the reverb is coming from here, so you have this, as we mix engineers call it, ear candy, so kind of like you want to create some interesting parts, and that's what I wanted to achieve here with this melody guitar. Same for, so let me solo this one as well, and yes, it's enabled. And now to Andy Hook's guitar. On both I used the SSL plugin, some basic EQ stuff. They didn't sound that bad. I added quite a bunch, 6-7 dB on 330, and you remember this was kind of like the area which I removed on the bass guitar, like 300 to 500 Hertz. It's often referred as being boxy and nasty, but when you kill on every single track this frequency, your song will sound thin in the end. And I hear this quite often online because you see too much videos who saying like, yeah, I remove everything at 300 because it's always boxy, and it's right, especially on drummers and vocals. This is like a problematic area. However, guitars often have their body, and the guts and the balls of the guitars are usually between 200 to 300, 400, 500. So it's sometimes healthy to add quite an amount of stuff here to fill in the gap. You know, when you look at the frequency, everything from 20 to 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, you have to make sure that every single piece of a band and a song has its place in the frequency. That's the reason it's not so easy just like to make the bass guitar louder, because when you make something louder, something else has to be quieter, because not everything can happen in the same place. So you have to make decisions where to put the instruments, and that's what I wanted to achieve here. So let me bring in both processing at the same time here on Andy's guitar when he starts. And you really hear this when you listen closely, how it gets kind of like more, a little bit more body and a little bit more low end. And of course it's getting louder because I added some high end shelf here, but it's really kind of like giving it more character to the sound. When it comes to reverb for the rhythm guitars, you have to be careful to send rhythm guitars because they have so much low end and kind of like they lay this bed of sound into your track, that you don't send it to a big reverb because it can sound muddy and clutter up. So I decided to pick this called Rhythm Guitar Room, and I start with an EQ first. So let me enable here the send and go to the effect. So the Rhythm Guitar Room, where we have it here. Again, an EQ, because I wanted to remove all the nastiness down there. You always have to make care that you remove as much low end as you can. Usually, there's no rule of thumb here, but usually remove low end from reverb, because just 1 out of 100 times it will sound good. And afterwards I use this Valhalla Room preset. You see the preset is called Dense Room. I adjusted it. We have a decay time of just 1 second, so it gives a little bit of space but not too much. A high cut at 7 kilohertz again, and the depth is just 75%, so it's not the complete reverb. It's just kind of like a as the preset is called, dark short ambience. It just kind of gives them a little bit room, and especially again the contrast to Mark's guitar, which has this big reverb going on, but Andy's guitar is kind of like as if they were standing kind of like more in front of you. So this is how it sounds. Let me jump back to this guitars here. So you hear that? With that. So the next guitar that's happening here is Andy, who's after this hook rhythm, he's playing this, I call this pre-chorus melody. So it's more like really kind of like this nice melody that's kind of like flying around in the background. And again here, EQ. I did a lot of stuff on Andy's guitar here. And then adding this black box again. You will see this sometimes or sometime more often in the track because I simply love the plugin. I had a hard time to, at the same time, control the nastiness in that guitar part from Andy. Again, I think it was the plugins they used on Logic. They didn't sound that good. So at the same time, controlling all the harshness, but without killing the, let's say, the information, because the band told me they wanted this guitar to fly around a little bit, kind of like have this dreamy effect going on. And finally, this plugin made it work that the sound was kind of like smoothened out, but then stick out again as well. So you see this when I bypass how this affects Andy's guitar here. And for Andy, because he's playing similar parts like that through the whole song, I created another reverb here, which is called Andy Melody. Again, Bob Clearmountain. I told you I use this quite often. Again, starting with the preset Need You Tonight from In Excess, this famous guitar part, which Bob Clearmountain mixed as well. So using this preset again, adjusting stuff that it fit, but it's always good to have a starting point. Usually I'm not a fan of presets, but in this case the preset just worked right off the box, so why not stick to it? So here's the sound with Andy Melody, where we have it here. So Bob Clearmountain, and afterwards again just like some small adjustments on the reverb to adjust some of the frequencies here, but I just followed the instructions from the band. They wanted to have this guitar flying around, kind of like mysterical in the background. So you really hear how the guitar kind of like starting to fly above your head when I bring this in. And that's what I told you. You see how the song slowly builds up even more. So the arrangement is really fantastic, even without the vocals from Carlos, which we come to an end. But you see how which I like about the song, is how the song really starts to build up, and because more instruments coming in, and the band wanted me to achieve exactly that kind of like find something that contributes to the idea of the arrangement. And that's what I try to do here. Okay, now let's continue with the guitars. So we had Mark's string parts going on here, which we already covered. Let me quickly check. Yes, we did. I had to interrupt the video or break the video because my drive was full, so I had to start again a new session and print the first part, but hopefully you won't see any distraction here. So the next guitar that's kicking in is exactly another part of Mark's strumming, where he basically played the same pattern as the two strumming parts left and right, but he wanted to emphasize this effect. So let me bring in Mark's second strumming guitar here. You see, after he started, let me jump back a little bit more. So let me first quickly mute any pre-chorus guitar here. So that's the part where this melody guitar, which I called any pre-chorus melody, changed a little bit. So he starts with kind of like a similar melody that he did before, and then he's going like really loud. You see already in the wave file here that the volume is quite jumping in the recording already. So I wanted to keep that because that for me it was the clear sign that they wanted the whole song to push even for. Right now it might sound out of balance, but when the whole song is put together with all the vocals, you will clearly hear what I mean with that. So that's this melody guitar. Let me put in the reverb and the melody again, and this is basically was more the part where I needed to do those drastic EQ moves here. So again, let me show you this EQ. So you see a lot of dynamic moves going on because I didn't want to kill it. It's really like kind of controlling, because when he was jumping in volume and put more energy into his playing, the problematic frequencies jumped, of course, or became more obvious. That's the reason I wanted to tame them down with the dynamic EQ, which doesn't kill them, but just like bring them down the moment they are occurring in the song or got too loud. You see how they are ducked down? So then again, Andy's coming back basically with the same guitar as in the start. And this was the thing I told you in the beginning. On the recording session they sent me, each of those files were on a separate track. So it took me some time to reorganize it, but that's okay. It's not the task of, usually it's the task of producer, but like we were COVID-19 times, everyone was at home. So they recorded their stuff, which was fine. It took me like just one day of preparation to restructure the song, how I would mix it or how to make it more convenient for me to mix, but that's totally fine. So I did this here, even though he's sometimes playing different parts or kind of like a different melody, but he used the same amps and the same pedal emulations in Logic, so that's the reason I combined them here. So then Mark and Andy are coming back together for the verse again. And here, when you see now, and maybe going to highlight this in the video right now, is where Andy's guitar is now panned 100% left to right. The reason, and you will hear this when we hear the whole song in the end, it's like I wanted to have a separation between the first and second verse and then the third verse, because like every time the verse gets a little bit, or the song gets louder and more wide and more open, this is like the first time where the whole band is really actually playing the melody, everything is going on. So that's the reason I panned the guitar in this part 100% left and right, and you will see probably, yeah, exactly. So in the first part, you see the guitars from Andy are panned 75% left and right. When this part here, like those two parts here, which I show you, 83% left, right? So they're already like a little bit bigger. And then for the third time, and when I play the song, you will see the automation going, and I will highlight this video right now. You will see like the panning is automating more to the left, to the right when they're actually hitting the third verse. So that's the catchy part of the song, the catchy melody in the beginning, when the song really kind of like it's open. And I did some other adjustments on the final bus, which I show you in the end, but that's what I did. So going forward, so here's kicking in Andy with another we talked about this as well. So the next guitar that is occurring, let me check, is this little part from Andy again, and it sounds like this. So it sounds boring, of course, because it's not processed, but you will hear how it sounds afterwards. So this kind of like, it leads to the next chorus. And again, this is kind of like the great idea which I found in the song, how the band developed and thought the arrangement, because he didn't use this part when they kicked into the first chorus. So every single part of the song gets more added. So this is kind of like where the song is always getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it's kind of like falls apart, not in a bad way, for the instrumental part. So they really thought out the song in terms of arrangement. So I did, again, some EQ, some basic stuff. Again, you see the dynamic things going on, just like taming down a little bit of the frequencies. And afterwards, again, my good buddy, the Black Box Analog Design, amazing plugin, to bring out more life. So let me quickly jump now to the part again, make it a little bit bigger here so you see where we're coming from. And then I bring in the guitars, and afterwards we talked about the reverb already, which is the Bob Clearmountain Melody Hall, which is the same as for the previous part. I'm gonna enable both of them when it's gonna start. So you really clearly hear that when the reverb's kicking in, how the guitar was meant to be heard and played in the song. So again, without the hall, and I think the black box design here, and then the reverb setting really adds to the sound of this guitar. So, and I think we have, did we hide this? Let me check. No, that's the, let me quickly check where we are right now. Okay, now the funky guitar is coming in the second chorus. So let me jump to the funky guitar here. This is like the first time Andy played this. And I think in the outro he plays this again. So this is how the funky guitar is been played. No, this one here. So pan 30% to the right, and this is how it sounds. So this little ding, 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 ding. It's just like a nice addition. Again, this happens for the first time. They didn't use this in the first choruses. So it's really kind of like another layer of sound which they added. I used the same melody guitar hall which I used for Mark beginning, because I thought this fits the best. This time I just needed to use the SSL EQ, adding some brightness, and just removing just 2 dB on 800 here. Sometimes, of course, you don't need to do that much. Just do what it fits best and then just move on. Don't spend too much time on every single track. So here's the SSL and then the reverb going on here for the rhythm guitar. And again, this was the feedback from the band. They wanted this guitar to be slightly in the background so that you hear it but not hear it at the same time, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of like that you hear this ear candy, so you're always surprised, like coming from the next part, you always hear new sounds floating around your head. And this is the band, how they describe them themselves, always like a little bit surprising when it comes to sounds. It's a great arrangement, I can just emphasize that. It's certainly not mainstream, so you need to really take some time to dive into the song, and then you discover what they actually did on the song, because we have already too much boring songs out there, haven't we? So the next, let me just quickly stick to the performance here. So then at the same time, Mark added this part to the funky melody guitar. So let me jump to Mark here. Again, I need to just enable all the sends here, which I forgot. So now Mark is kicking in here with this melody guitar to accompany Andy with his funky part. So you hear this ding, 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 ding. Again, just from the arrangement, it's played slower. You know, it's like he's just using like those the slower notes to accompany Andy, which is playing this funky parts, and I panned them slightly left to right, so you clearly hear in your headphones how they're moving back and forth. And what I did here, again, some EQ to tame down. It's basically always following the same ideas, just kind of not to boost too much, but sometimes it's enough to remove the stuff that you don't want to make the guitar shine. Sometimes I need to boost stuff to really emphasize stuff. When you just, especially when we're talking about guitars that you want to be in the background, it's usually, in my experience, enough to tame just the stuff that's not there, because the band already thought about the sound when they picked the presets in Logic, so they wanted exactly that sound. So why I should change it that drastically? I just remove it that it fits better to the song. So that's what I did here with this EQ, and then afterwards another SSL because I wanted this flavor of the song. And I use this time, you see here on the left, the compressor, because on this part I just wanted to control the little peaks here on Mark's guitar, but not too drastic, using the fast attack. So this is how it sounds. It's just there to hold Mark's guitar into place, and because when I jump right now back, I told you this is going to be in depth. You see this peaks here, what he was playing, and those peaks, the same idea what we started in the beginning with the bass guitar, just like to control those peaks, not to kill them because that's part of the performance, but sometimes it's just about controlling the stuff to hold it into place and to lock it into place. And I sent this guitar to the melody guitar hall, which we talked about already. So here is it with the reverb. Talking about layers, we are not done yet, guys. Then Andy kicks in, and I call this Andy Chorus topping guitar. So in the middle of this part, he's adding another layer of sound here, which sounds unprocessed like this. So where we are, so here's the topping. Okay, so without processing, maybe you hear it slightly in the background. It's panned in the middle, so it should come right from the center. So it's just kind of like this one bar, bing, bing, bing. So that's all what he did. So again, I didn't use that much EQ, some high end, removing stuff, adding a little bit of character again at 380, something like that, and rolling off something down, everything below 280 even, which is quite drastic for a guitar. But this guitar was just meant to be playing the high end chords in that section, so I don't need any low end whatsoever. That's what I removed here, and sending this again to the melody guitar hall. So you see, I use this melody guitar hall quite often because I wanted at least the melodies to sound in a different in the same room, and that's what I want to try to achieve here. So it's just kind of like a little layer on top of the part before we now go into the instrumental section. So let me check. There's nothing going on here. No, it's just, so you see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guitars playing at the same time in different reverbs and different panning. So that's kind of like where things sometimes get a little bit complicated, because Carlos is still singing here, and Carlos, by the way, did all the lead vocals and all the background vocals on his own. So I wanted, the difficulty here is always like really to make place and room for each other. So let me just show you the second chorus part here before we go into the instrumental part, where the song is almost kind of like has a break, or starts with a new, almost like a new song within the song before we then go to the final chorus. But we're going to talk about this in detail. So you heard how the guitar ring out a little bit, and then Michael is playing just the quarter note pulse on the hi-hats because then the new part is kicking in. And you see, talking about automation, on almost every single guitar track you see the little word read here in green, which means that I used volume automation most foremost on almost every guitar track, because even though the guitars were kind of like consistent in the volume, but it's kind of like really like sometimes like a dB here or 0.5 dB here. And this is like, well, I remember correctly, what we ended up in the final reviews of the mix. Sometimes the band was just like, we like the sound so far, but could you please just add the rhythm guitar occurring at 2 minutes 20 by 0.5 dB a little bit more. And that's totally fair, and this is common practice when you work with bands. Sometimes just a dB missing here and there to satisfy everyone with the sound. So now the instrumental section, and I would say I play you the instrumental parts first and foremost without processing, at least on the guitars that are occurring in that part. So let me just make this a little bit smaller. So it's going from here into the solo part, into the break. So I'm gonna play you this part. Of course, the drums and the bass guitar are already processed, but nothing else. So you just hear the guitars, so you get an idea about the arrangement, including a solo, and then I will bring in the processing. So let me break this down because I think it's important. So it's gonna be those tracks here. Let's first unsolo them, and then the same for Mark, including his effects guitars. So let me start with the effects guitars first though, because those are the parts, when remember from the beginning, which I didn't touch in terms of reverb and delay. I combined everything to one track. And just use some compression because some of the peaks were too drastic for me, so I needed to tame down the stuff here, and afterwards sending it to another EQ, just like taming down as a final treatment. But you see here on the send it says guitar mellow, so it's just going straight into the melody guitars bus, but without any additional reverb or delay here, because they already had the delay and effects which Mark wanted to sound like already baked into the track. So I didn't touch this. So let's first listen to the tracks here. On the mix window, by the way, you see just one track, even though it's 3, because I combined them to one, because I know I didn't want to touch them anyway. So why have the screen messed up with too many tracks? And by the way, I'll keep the drums and the bass now enabled, and in solo, just mute Andy's part by now, so you clearly hear the idea how it's gonna build. The effects guitars really kind of like create that bed of sound, like the sound bed behind, like this weird three-dimensional stuff in the background with Mark's guitars, and then this bass deep, which we talked about at the beginning, comes in just for a little 1 or 2 bars, and on top of that, Andy kind of like created his arrangement. That was the idea of the band, I think. So, and then in comparison, let me first unsolo them or mute them again, and now I'm going to show you what Andy played above this. So we have this clean guitar and then a double of the same performance, but he played it 2 times. I just didn't just copy the track, it's just 2 performance from Andy. And then he played the same part essentially, but an octave up. So he really kind of like, it's crazy how Andy was like kind of developing this sound idea in different frequency areas and tones and tonality. So it's really a great arrangement. You'll just listen to Andy's guitar here right now, still with the drums and bass going on in the background. Sounds dry, but now let me bring in all the effects that we were talking about. So those are the 4 guitars from Andy we were talking about, which we just talked, no, those 4, sorry. Those 4. So I sent every of those guitars into the hall and just did, again, just the basic, if needed, just the SSL plugin because I love it the most and the sound it adds to the track. Sometimes I had to use this fab filter to kind of like do the detailed stuff. And the sharp stuff. So let me bring everyone together and then all the reverbs here at the same time. So you hear the difference. First without the reverb and then with. And exactly the moment, and let me zoom in a little bit here. This is sometimes where reverb come in handy or really gets noticeable. You see he stops here just for 1 bar or half a bar, and then he comes back in, and this is kind of like where the space occurs, where the reverb really comes into place, where you hear the sound decay over time before he starts to play. So let me play this same section with the reverb, and I want you to notice how it sounds when here at bar 104 when he's stopping. It's subtle, but it's there. Let me quickly check here everything that we haven't. Yeah, exactly. So this is for the vocals. Let me quickly check. This, yes, background vocal played guitar solo. So we have to enable the halls here because we come into the solo. So again. You see, I just forgot to enable the melody guitar hole. So again. And now together with Mark's effects guitars, and then you clearly hear, let me enable everything, how this develops. And you hear, and remember talking with the drummer Michael that he wanted to, especially in that part, the snare and the kick, to change the volume sometimes, because like you have a lot of space around the notes right now. It's not so dense as in the first choruses. So you really, and the problem is that then every single note or frequency gets more highlighted and more noticeable. So you really need to take care, and that's the reason I played so much with the volume control. And you see even on the snare here, snare top, bottom, the toms and the overhead microphones, I used volume automation on top, and of course on the drum bus in the end as well, because you really can sometimes want to emphasize a certain section. Just sometimes just a dB is enough. But you need to take care of that, and that's what we worked on. And in the end, when we kind of like shared the mix back and forth, and they gave me the feedback. So looking at the arrangement again, everything then, of course, leads to this solo part here, the section I just showed you. And then the solo part, and let me just... Andy recorded 2 different solo takes. We first started with one, I remember, and the band wasn't quite happy with how it in the end sounded, so they decided to do a new overdub and record a second part to it. And Andy played 2 different parts. They sound differently. One more high with high notes and a brighter melody, and some more dark feeling. And I panned them slightly left and slightly right, so it's still kind of like as a solo usually occurs in the middle, but it's a little bit wider because I make room left and right for both solo parts here. And Mark, and let me, before I show you the solo from Andy, which is of course the key part here, what Mark did, he leads into the solo part with a little section here, and then he's accompanying Andy with a rather heavy rhythm solo here, what he's playing. So first Mark without the solo from Andy. Okay, and then let me unsolo Mark here and just play the solo without any processing. The whole song gets louder, especially like when the solo is coming to the end, the drums are pushing and the bass is pushing, so everything gets louder. And that's what I did here. I sent the first basic EQ, SSL, as always, so let's enable that. I sent one part of Andy's solos into the melody guitar hole, which had the Start Me Up preset going on. And the second part, I created a dedicated reverb just for the solo part. Because even though they're basically playing the same thing, but I wanted to distinguish them even more because it just fits to the overall feel and vibe of the whole song. They have so many complex layers of sounds going on and different reverbs, which ended up quite good. So this just shows like the talent of the band or the artist, that they have a sound in mind. And in the end, when you put everything together as a mixing engineer, you see the big picture, what they had in mind, and maybe just didn't accomplish using the plugins they have. But that's kind of like, sometimes you see the picture of the song during the mixing process. And that's what I wanted to achieve here. So this guitar solo, let me enable this. And the EQ going on here, nothing really crazy on the solo guitar, just like, again, just taming down the things that I didn't like, not emphasizing too much. And this guitar part here, this is really crazy. It's called generic guitar solo. That's the preset I started with. Again, of course, you always have to adjust it, but that's so weird and crazy going on in the background. It really just, it doesn't fit to any classical rock guitar solo, but in this case, it has this mysterical vibe to it, what I wanted to achieve. So let's listen to the guitar solo first without especially this effect, and then I bring it in. Well, you know what? Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just solo as an exception, I just solo the guitar solo from Andy here right now, just with this reverb, because you really hear that special, because it has its own reverb. Just this part is going into that reverb. So let me show you how this sounds. Okay, so now you know how it sounds, so let me just mute the vocals for now as we started, and then listen to the whole part, no process and every plugin enabled, so you know what I'm talking about. So that's the part. When the solo ends, both Andy and Mark, they played their, as they called it, I think their couple, or their the guitar couple here. They actually played the same part with different tones, of course, because they use different arm simulations. And you see it starts here on this note. And I remember that I had to tame it down a little bit because this solo guitar here was ringing out. And it was ringing out even more, but at the same time, both Andy and Mark come in here at bar 149. So you see both of them have kind of like a fade in volume wise, and this has a fade out. So I just wanted to create the transition here because when they recorded it, it came in too suddenly and too surprisingly, so it was a little bit distracting. So basically what they're playing, they're just playing the quarter notes leading into the final chorus. So it's kind of like a little break after this bombastic solo, and the drums are really going crazy, and the bass guitar. So that's another arrangement, so kind of like that you can breathe out a little bit, have a little pause before then at the end the song explodes for the last time with the final chorus. So that's what they wanted to achieve here, and I think they did a great job. So mixing wise on both tracks. So let me jump quickly to this section here. Final chorus, so it's a bridge clean guitar. Yeah, this one here. Showed you again what I did here. And of course, both I sent to the same reverb just to create that effect that they're actually playing in the same room. So no surprise here, so no different effect. So they lead just in, and then no one is playing without or just Andy and Mark in this part. Before the final note, what will happen now is Michael on the drums is playing a fill on the toms, and I really emphasize it makes really like a volume jump before we get into the final chorus, and then we talk about the last guitars we haven't covered so far. So for Andy, it's those two guitars here for the final chorus, and they sound like this. Just quickly solo them. And processed, again, SSL always works. On this guitar I needed a little bit more processing. You see just usually the same frequencies, just taming down a little bit before they're poking out too much, sending it to the already known melody guitar hole, and it sounds like this. And Mark had some additional guitars going on in the final chorus as well. So you see this is called Mark Outro guitar, and I think, yeah, that's his final guitar. So 3 guitars playing, and then of course the vocals, which we come now playing. This is Mark's guitar just on its own. EQ wise, rolling off adding some high ends, removing a little bit 1.6 dB here at 1.4 kilohertz, which I didn't want to tame down dynamically, but just remove it a little bit. I remember we had some discussions in the final part where the band was saying like that some notes are too harsh in their ears, because we were double checking the mix in the car, in the stereo, and good headphones and bad headphones and all that stuff. So sometimes I remember those were the little things that we're constantly working on for some days, like really like the tiny little stuff. And sometimes it happens, and this is quite usual, that you do something and what the band asks you to do, and then you do the mix, and then suddenly other things come into your ears, or you hear them, because now one frequency is tamed down, but now another one is out of balance. So it's kind of like this little, and usually in COVID times, you have to do this via email and cloud and all that stuff. But usually in the old world, the band is sitting next to the mixing engineer in the studio, and you can do this on the fly. It usually takes 1 hour, 2 hours, and then the mix is done. Now we had to constantly write back and forth, but that's okay. So SSL, another EQ, additional taming down of frequencies again, and the guitar hole, and this is how it sounds like. And then let me show you what it sounds like together with the drums when they explode, and the bass before we finally get to the chorus, to the vocals. I wanted to hold that last note, of course. So now we're done. We have drums, we have bass, we have both guitars. So now finally let's talk about the vocals, and we're gonna work backwards. So we're gonna start with the background vocals and the additional vocals and the harmony vocals, and finally we come to Carlos' main vocal part. So I showed you already in the beginning a little bit that I created this group which is just simply called background vocals, and in this because Carlos did a lot of harmony stuff here, especially for the choruses and the pre-choruses, where you often kind of like had this singing or some additional support for the main vocals. And you see here on an individual track basis I didn't do that much. Basically this save view, this track here needs to be on the right side, so we talk about those 6 channels, and I'll just show you how they sound, and as an exception I'm gonna just solo them for the vocals, so it's clear what we're talking about. So you see on the track basis I didn't do anything on the processing, I just combined them to a group and processed them from there. All I did is that I panned them slightly different. So you see number 5, number 6 were panned in the middle, number 3 and 4 panned 20-30% left and right, and then the main 1 and 2 100% right. So this creates this image as if a choir was standing in the room, and beneath, what's the word, behind the singer, that was the word I was missing. So I wanted to create this really stereo field, not everything panned left and right, so kind of like something in between and some excitement. Again, this was based on the feedback of the band. They wanted to have this choir effect. So here are the background vocals, how they sound on their own. So this part, and then he was sometimes singing this one here.
Baby, you could save her.
So, by the way, it's just Carlos singing. So he's doing all the background vocals, all the harmonies, which is sometimes really tough, but he managed to really create 5, 6, 7 different vocal tonalities and tones and notes, which is amazing. So let me collapse those channels again, and let's talk just about the processing. I'm gonna jump here to the part again. So I started with a de-esser, which I usually do before I do any treatment in the vocals. And by the way, of course, what I did, that I did some gain staging and some pitch shifting stuff when it was needed on a track basis, but I did this already before and then rendered the audio back to the mixing session, so I won't show you that. It's kind of part of the mix preparation. So now I'm going to start with the de-esser to control the most obvious S's and T's and P's that sometimes occur in a vocal performance. Usually when you run into a compressor, for instance, all those S's and these bad things in a vocal sometimes, and this happens to every single singer around the world, it gets exaggerated by a compressor. So sometimes I use two different de-essers, one in the beginning and one kind of like in the end, but usually I start with a de-esser just to level out the harsh S's that sometimes occur. So I think I'm going to jump here to the save you part, because then this DS, you will hear what this de-esser is doing.
Baby, you could save her.
So you see this here in this little bar where 3 dB gets dropped down. A de-esser, for all you who don't know, is basically a compressor that's related to certain parts of the frequency range, and it grabs those S's that usually occur between 4 kilohertz and 7 kilohertz, depends on the vocal, of course, but this is what a de-esser is doing. Afterwards, in EQ, usually same as you see here for background vocals. When you want to push them slightly in the background, you roll off some high and low end. So you have kind of like this mid-rangey information, but this, when you remove especially high end, you push them a little bit in the background. So here's the EQ.
Baby, you could save her.
And you see there's kind of like a little bit low end here below 70. This is sometimes air conditioning. It's kind of like when a singer is incidentally hitting his microphone or stepping with his foot on the floor. So you want to remove all that stuff anyway. And finally, an instance of Virtual Mix Rack where I use the compressor with a fairly slow attack and fast release, which emulates a little bit the CLA2A compressor, which we used already on the bass and we will use on the lead vocals. So here's the compressor.
Baby, you could save her.
Kind of like pushing the vocals a little bit up front and make them more consistent in the sound. But the main thing here is, and again, in effects chain, I used this effects for the reverb, a dedicated reverb setting and delay just for the background vocals to emphasize this choir effect. And again, using Clear Mountains Domain, it's an amazing plugin. Again, started with a preset which is called stereo background vocals, but I had to adjust it because sometimes those presets from Bob Clearmountain are sometimes too over the top. So I had to adjust not on this level here, but when it comes here, especially to the delay times and the reverb times here, where you can add in 3 different reverb sends. So I adjusted a little bit the volume here to make it fit to the sound. So this is how it sounds.
Baby, you could save her.
Again, Mike, you should enable this. So again, let's jump to this part. And now in context with the song. So that's the effect. And I talked about this one thing that I did here on this, where I extracted this one single part here. And let me solo this for a moment as well. So this is just one part save you, and I will play it first in context with the song, so you hear why this save you, what Carlos was singing several times, but this is special because the instrumental parts begin, and this save you had this effect that it lasted longer than the others. So I wanted to treat it individually to emphasize this effect. So here is it how it sounds. No processing going on whatsoever yet. So it's of course a little bit swallowed in the music. Here again, soloed.
Baby, I will save you.
So again, starting with the de-esser, and especially due to the S from save you.
Baby, I will save you.
Not doing much as always, a little goes a long way here. Mixing, especially a big session like that, is really, it's the combination of 100 single small decisions instead of 1 or 2 big decisions. And then in EQ, in this case, I wanted to emphasize the high end and didn't want to push it back because it was standing out. It should stand out a little bit more, but again, rolling off some low end and some boxiness here in the mid range.
Baby, I will save you.
But the effect I wanted to use here is really this, I call this effects delay. And I'm going to enable this. What I used for this is Wave Super Trap 6. This is a, it makes the vocal, is a delay, and it creates several different voices out of one signal. So in this case, 6, slightly different in pitch. So you have a weird effect going on, and I'll show you what it means, how it sounds when I enable this.
Baby, I will save you.
So it's get repeated, but with different pitch effects and in the voice. So you think that there are several voices going on, and it makes more sense when I put it into first without the effects, and then I bring it in together with the sound. And again. And Carlos, and this comes in the end, is singing the same part again. So it makes more sense when you hear then the lead vocal, because Carlos is singing this "Baby, I will save you," and then slightly in the background you hear those voices in the background, those delayed vocals from this effect. So we talk about this in a few. So let me show you just like the last 30 seconds into the final instrument, into this instrumental part, now with the background vocals and this one single save you effect.
Baby, you could save her. Baby, you could save her.
So harmony outro vocal, we're gonna skip that because this is just like a harmony that he adds in the outro, hence I didn't do that much, just basic EQ using the SSL console here with some compression, nothing really fancy, and sending it this to the so-called Bob reverb, which we're gonna use several times on vocals, but we're gonna skip this for now, and now come to those as I call it, vocalization parts. This happens in the instrumental part here, and I will solo them for now again, so you clearly hear what Carlos intended to create with those effects. Really cool effect.
You better go. Just go. Just go.
So it's already weird, like the pure recording, but when I add in this effect, and I heard this on the rough mix they sent me, so I knew what they were going after. So I wanted to create this effect and even like make it better. That's my job. So on both tracks, in this case not the SSL plugin, but a chain from Steven Slate, which is kind of like the same EQ, compression. I cut down almost everything above 5.4 because I really wanted to push them a little backwards. It's kind of like dreamy, almost nightmarish sound, and tamed the signal with a trimmer here in the end. And I did this the same, literally the same on both. Here I'm just using the 3 EQ compression, and this is basically a low pass filter, so just like taming down everything above 5, so it's really mid-rangey here. So now with the EQ,
Just go.
and the effect I used here, which is called vocalization, again, yes, you guessed it, Bob Clear Mountain, and I tweaked this preset quite a lot. I mean, I could start from scratch because I thought that this Avalon from Roxy Music, the famous song that he mixed, one of the best songs ever mixed by far. By the way, if you want to use a reference track, check out Avalon from Roxy Music. It's an amazing song, an amazing mixed song. So I used this preset and tweaked it quite a bit. And he has this effect here, which is, and I'm going to highlight this now on the screen. It's called delay blur. What this does, it's kind of like changing the delay effects and adds this blur. It's kind of like it makes it sound more ugly but more interested at the same time. And let's bring this in, and you will clearly hear what this sounds like, especially on those effects. So we're going to start in the beginning and then in context with the song again.
You better go. Just go. Just go.
It's simply amazing. It's just, I don't know how this plugin was programmed, but I simply love it. It is worth every penny. And now in context with the song here, I'm going to start from here. I mean, it's the idea of the band to create something like that. It's just like an amazing idea, and you see like I panned one voice 66% to the left, but the other voice just 28% to the right. So I didn't want to create exactly the same effect. I just wanted to create this weird thing that you hear in the background, and you're thinking, what's going on here? So really cool thing. So now we're coming to the three lead vocal parts, and I'm gonna start with the main vocal here because the other two are more or less just parallel processing to emphasize. So here's Carlos' vocal, and let me jump to the first verse here. Here's Carlos' vocal on its own without any processing.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort.
Amazing singer. Really like his voice because he's unique. You instantly realize that it's Phorm or that it's Carlos. I've mixed some songs for them already. We're just currently working on the third song together. And he has a very special voice, which makes the song really undistinguishable. So you don't have to do that much on his vocal in terms of pitch shifting and everything because he's very much under control about his voice. So I could concentrate on the processing. And again, I start with the de-esser. Nothing really fancy. Then I use this guy here. It's called Radiator, which is kind of like a tube amp simulation. Adds kind of like this analog warmth to the voice. I've removed a little bit of the bass because I thought it was too much. You can use this bass knob here when you work with bass guitars or sometimes even drums, but for the vocal it was a little bit too much. Added a touch of treble high end here and dialed in the mix knob here on the bottom right corner to around 75%. So here how this sounds. I will bring this in while he was singing.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours.
It's just a bit, but it makes sense in the end of the day in the chain. And then I will open three different plugins at the same time because for me it is kind of like a chain which I use very, very often on vocals. It's a classical chain. For every one of you mixing probably know this chain. You start with 1176 going into an LA2A, so two compressors as a chain. In this case, I put this SSL EQ, my beloved one, in the middle of those two processes, but usually you go from one compressor into the other, but there's no rule. The idea here is that this is basic EQ going on because I like the sound of this EQ. So let's close this right now, but let's talk about those two compressors. The LA76 is known for its really aggressive and fast attack. So I set this compressor in a way that it's barely working just when Carlos was going overboard, or there were kind of like some peaks in his voice when he was jumping too much, but I didn't want to kill it with gain staging because I like this dynamic in his voice. But just in case, kind of like a gatekeeper, the first one, the black one here, is just like taming down the peak. So when I play his vocal and I will jump to a more louder section, you will see that the needle of this compressor is just sometimes just ducking down 1 or 2 dB, similar what we had on the snare drum some minutes ago. And the main work or main compression work that's going on is coming from the LA2A, which has a smoother, let's say, attack and release settings, which you cannot choose here because that's not the way the compressor is working. But the combination of both makes the vocal from Carlos really shine. So let's start, and I will first bypass both of the compressors and just start with the EQ so you hear what this is doing already. So let me bring this up. First bypass and then I bring it in.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the...
Especially the high shelf and the upper mids on this plugin is just amazing. It's not completely 100% smooth or silky. It adds a little bit of grit to it, but that's what I like, especially on Carlos vocals. So let me collapse that, and now let me open two compressors at the same time, and we're going to jump to a section maybe here where there are more dynamics going on. So I want you to look at both needles on this one and see how they react when I play the vocal part here.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold.
Of course, enable them.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures. Good attentive and mother of yours.
So especially on the last part, on the word that, you see like where the 1176er is just tucking down the word by 1 dB, and then the signal is going into the LA2A. So again.
Yours. Good attentive and mother of yours.
And without the, so you hear the difference.
Yours. Good attentive and mother of yours.
So you hear when you listen closely that because the word that is so much louder, and I wanted to keep this dynamic because this was part of his performance, and you want to keep that because it's live, it's not just like streamlined pop. So I want to keep this natural feeling of Carlos singing. But when you just use one compressor, the LA2A, due to the way how it's reacting to incoming signals, it's ducking down the overall volume of his singing too much. So you want to control that, and this is the reason I put the other compressor first. So again, just the LA2A, and then I show you the difference with both compressors enabled.
Yours, good attentive and mother of yours. Yours, good attentive and mother of yours.
And now in context with the song, let me start now in the first section again. So here is Carlos vocal, no effects and reverb going on, just the processing.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort. Go to tend to your mother, of course.
Okay, now let me solo the vocal again to show you the effects. So the first one, of course, is again Bob Clearmountain. I used just one plugin. That's so convenient to use because it's a mixture of delay and reverb, and it just sounds amazing. So I sent quite healthy amount of his vocal into. Let me first bypass the second one here into this effect. But you know what? I start with the other one first because it's more subtle. This is the so-called slap delay, which is a usual trick on vocals. So I set up a small delay, feedback completely down to 0, and a small delay which is just 26% milliseconds, on the left side and 45 on the right. And this is not really perceived because it's so fast as a delay, but it makes the vocal just a little bit brighter and bigger and kind of like more three-dimensional without really noticing it. But that's the trick here. So here's the slap delay on Carlos vocals, and I bring it in again to show you the difference.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort.
So it's really kind of like you feel that something is missing when I bypass it, but you don't really notice it. Sometimes that's the purpose of effects, that you use an effect, but you don't want it to be really noticed in a song. It's just kind of like that you make the voice a little bit bigger than it actually is, and then you can process it from there. And now the reverb here. Let's Dance was the starting point, and then again, as always, changing the delay time here a little bit. I'm not using that much of delay, you see, 220 on the left and 160 on the right. It's not like over the top 80s, but I didn't need this for this song. So here's how it sounds when I bring it in, and listen to the mouse, or see on the mouse here when I bring it in.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort. Go to tend to your mother, of course.
And in context with the song.
Go to your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort. Go to tend to your mother, of course.
Of course, you have to capture the overall feeling. The idea of the band, they told me they want a kind of like stadium rock anthem. So I did this on purpose, that it sounds maybe 5% too much and over the top in terms of really reverb. It's kind of like 80s feeling, but I mean, this, when you have this, I think it fits to the song and kind of like the way Michael is playing the drums and the guitars build the song. So I think this fitted, and at the end the band approved the sound. So what I'm supposed to doing here. And now the second part is this called lead vocal parallel, and it's not happening all the time, but just on certain parts. And let me show you first how it sounds on its own. It's no processing going on whatsoever so far, so it's just the pure parallel or the same vocal that Carlos sang on the main part. So what I did, I started with, and this already is kind of like really smashing down the audio, so we will hear quite a lot of volume jump here, cranking the high shelf here, are really drastic moves, cranking 10 dB on 230, his fundamental voice. So I really wanted to EQ his voice kind of like over the top. And let me start first with the EQ, so you'll immediately hear what I mean. So let me bring it up a little bit again so you can hear it.
Tend to swallow whole.
Without.
Tend to swallow whole. I know she's stronger than rock.
So you hear how this gritty character in his voice gets emphasized, and then into this compressor, which is called the Monster, which is basically a copy of the 1176 with the famous all button in. So the ratio all, not we have 4, 8, 12, and 20, and then there's all button where you kind of like hit all 4 ratio buttons at the same time, which is called all buttons in, and that's a modulation of that. And you will now hear the jump, of course, in volume because it's really smacking down the vocals. But that's the idea of parallel processing.
Tend to swallow whole. I know she's stronger than rock.
So you see almost 20 dB of gain reduction. What this will make to the vocal, it's kind of like it pushes it really out of the speakers. It's kind of like there's no dynamic going on anymore, but that's the idea because you really want to add grit and power to the main vocal, and that was the idea here. So let me bring this back into where we started, was minus 18. And then I went afterwards with the de-esser because due to the heavy processing, the S's were of course emphasized and exaggerated. And I had to use this from Isotope RX Deplosive because there were some parts where he obviously hit the microphone with his mouse or with his foot or his hand. There was some explosive going on, and this plugin just kills it. It's pure magic, this plugin. So it's more like a repair plugin. And then sending the same vocal into the same reverb as the lead vocal, but with a lower level. So because as it's too much compressed, I didn't want to send too much signal into the same reverb plugin as the main vocals, but in the end the same reverb, so to have a cohesive sound. So first just the parallel on its own, then in context with the lead vocal, and then in context with the whole song.
Tend to swallow whole. I know she's stronger than rock. I know rock is not unbreakable.
So now when I just solo the lead vocal and I bring in the parallel, you will hear the jump in power and energy.
Tend to swallow whole. I know she's stronger than rock. I know rock is not unbreakable.
So let's jump to this part here.
Fill her head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures.
So this parallel thing, it's really something like you over-exaggerate the high end and low end, so like kind of like what you want to hear, what defines the vocal. You compress it, you squash it, but then you mix it slightly under, so you make the original performance just bigger and bring out the good stuff without going over the top, just like slightly bending in, sending it to the same reverb, and you have a cohesive lead vocal sound. And now in context with the song, those two things.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures. Go to tend to that mother of yours.
And finally, this is called lead vocal last chorus. What I did here was, let me quickly jump if this vocal is noticeable. No, I see I just didn't use it whatsoever. Let me quickly jump to the final chorus here. What happened? So let me insert this. Again, just SSL. And using the same, yeah, there it is. Using the same FX delay which we used for the save view pattern, because the band wanted me that in the last chorus, of course, where everything is happening, that this the lead vocals get more exciting, and because it's getting loud and everything, so Carlos needed something to have pushed through. So I added this effect. So first without the effect, and then I bring it in.
Oh, you know, guns are not just for criminals.
So he's singing differently. It was another take, and now with the effects going on.
You know, guns are not just for criminals.
And together with the other two lead vocals.
You know, guns are not just for criminals.
And together with the song, I will start here, so you hear the transition and the little fill from Michael into the final chorus.
You know, guns are not just for criminals. You know, wolves are not the same fight for everyone.
So when treating vocals, it's really that you not only find the space that they cut through the mix, of course, with all the guitars and drums going on, but with vocals, it's even more important to put them in this three-dimensional feed, like back and forth and left to right. And this is sometimes hard to achieve because the instruments sometimes capture so much of energy and frequencies, so that you need to put the vocals into the song that is still noticeable but without overbearing the rest. Now we're done with all the tracks, so let me finally go to the subgroups here, which add to the sound. So first, let's start with the drums. On the drum bus, so this is a treatment the whole drum bus, all the drums are getting. And you will see this on every single sub bus. I used this virtual console collection, which is set in this case on the Brit N channel, which is a Neve console. I think I used different ones for different groups, yes. So what this channel is doing, it emulates the characteristics of certain and famous mixing consoles like SSL and Trident and API and Neve. And for the drums, I went for the Neve. Afterwards, some really small EQ moves, adding a touch of 15K, like the high ends, adding a touch at 7K, where it's kind of like emphasizing the attack and some of the sizzle of the cymbals, and adding another touch at 200, so a little bit of the snare to push, and then finally this saturator with this called London. They have New York and Hollywood and London is really like this warm British sound, which matches the Brit N setting on the virtual console collection. So I wanted to give the drums like a warm hug in the end, a little bit more low end, because they sounded a little bit too, sometimes not too cleanish or too high endish, but like too processed from the Marble Room in the Superior Drummer expansion. So this kind of like adds a little bit warm glue, and I will bring in one by one just on the drum bass here, first solo and then in context with the song again. So let me jump here to a part here. So now again, sorry for that. So you really hear when I enable the EQ and the London module here, the virtual tube collection, how the sub energy from the kick drum is get really kind of a little push. So once again. And finally, a compressor. As we're constantly using the SSL plugin, I wanted to compress the drums overall just a tiny bit with the SSL bus compressor, which is famous. The settings are rather famous for drums. Slowest attack, auto release. Slowest attack means you don't tame down the transients. You even emphasize them a little bit more because the attack is too slow to pull down the transients. So you emphasize this. 2-to-1 ratio, nothing too fancy here, and then bring up the makeup gain knob here to compensate for the compression that's going on. This is a crucial piece of the drum sound in this song. So first without, and then I bring it in. Amazing. Then let's go to the bass guitar. Same here. Virtual mix rack, in this case just the virtual channel, in this case for the bass guitar on the Trident setting. Let me bypass this for now, just the bass. A little bit low end pushing here again, a little goes a long way, and then finally some EQ. It looks quite a heavy, but this is what I did in the end, where I really kind of wanted to make the bass guitar sit in the mix and to control like the last little things that I obviously didn't catch on the track basis. And now in context with the song. Let's talk rhythm guitars here. First, again, virtual console collection. Again, just for the bass guitar on the Trident setting here. So you see, I just used the Neve, I think so far for the drums, and then 2 times the Trident console here. And you really kind of, like in this case, you hear a little bit push in the upper mids on the guitar. And in this case, the first instance when I used mid-side processing, it's an advanced technique for sure. Those 2 bands that I removed here are just removed in the middle frequency, so in the mid, not on the sides, because I wanted to make some room for the snare drum and the bass guitar and a little bit of Carlos vocal. And it was clouding up a little bit in the middle here because most of the guitars were panned to the side. Sometimes a little bit to the side or almost completely to the side, and this is when I wanted to clean up the mids a little bit, and just like an overall 1 dB shelf to brighten up the guitars a little bit. So this is how it sounds. So you really hear how really kind of like the guitars come a little bit more to life when I enable this EQ. And this is sometimes really something that you might ask, why don't you do this on a track basis? Sometimes it's kind of like you are happy with the mix, with the overall balance and the individual sounds, and in the end you feel there's something missing, but you don't want to go back to the 25 guitar tracks anymore and find out. So you add just like a little bit of sparkle in the end to the tracks. You see it's just 1 dB, but it already kind of like, it feels like more a dB of high shelf added, but it's just 1 dB. Sometimes that's enough. And now the melodic guitars. I did more here. I used the London as a first instant, just like a tiny bit of saturation going into the Trident setting again to emulate the sound of the Trident mixing console. And then a just small EQ move here, and I think it's just at 3.5 kilohertz. I removed 0.6 dB. Again, it was kind of like to clean up that area where the vocal and the drums were sitting. It's really those tiny things in the end. So let me bring this in one by one, so you hear the difference. I even disabled the EQ, so you see at the end I decided not to go that way. So it's just the virtual tube collection here and the virtual channel. And finally, the vocals. And I think now I can enable everything because we are listening to the whole song already. Vocals, let me first start with this one. Same idea, virtual tube collection. It's kind of like it's a tube, so it adds like all the characteristics of a tube amp going into the Trident as well. So you see I picked 5 times or 4 times the Trident and just 1 time the Brit in the Neve console for the drums. So first here the tube collection, and then bring in the virtual console.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up.
I mean, sorry to interrupt again, but this plugin is really absolutely brilliant. It's amazing how, of course it's getting a little bit louder, but you see the output knob, I brought it down a bit so to compensate. It's just kind of like the overall track, even though you processed a lot on the track base already, it just gets an overall lift, but it always sounds, almost anytime it sounds better due to the saturation added. It's just brilliant. So listen closely to Carlos when I just enable this plugin here in the top.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures.
And as I said, de-essing on a track basis, and then in the end, again, overall, to tame down the S's, kind of like the final control of the S's after all the saturation and compression going on. I wanted to tame them down a little bit more again. So here's the de-esser.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and whole.
And you see those brown things here in this window here. This is where the de-esser is working. So it's really kind of like small things, just like taming down a little bit. So kind of like to make the vocals in the end kind of like polished in the end. And then a plugin that I simply love. It looks tiny. Maybe some of you might know it. The Mag 2. I just used this to add some high-end sparkle because the high shelf on this plugin is just great, amazing. You don't need that much. I just added 2 dB here on at 10. It's kind of like the last, it calls the air band. So it's really kind of like a final lift up on the vocal after. And I did this, I remember, really in the last, as a last step, because I felt sometimes the vocal needed just a little tiny last push on the high end here. So without, and then I bring it in.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures. Go to tender that mother of yours.
So we are done with the subgroups, and now let's finish the mix here. We're going to the submix. It looks like a lot, but the decisions I took here are getting smaller. First, the virtual mix bus again. This is kind of like the big brother, or the, let's say, the mix bus version for everyone who doesn't know of this guy here. This is the virtual channel, which is supposed to use on channel basis. I use it on subgroups, and on the overall mix, I use the Trident setting again. So every single signal of the whole song is going through this guy. So it adds the characteristics of the Trident console to the overall song here. So let me start one by one, and then I control a little bit with the volume again. So I leave this open so you not get fooled by volume jumps. So just the virtual mix bus here.
Fill your head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures. Go to tender that mother of yours.
It's just brilliant. I hope you hear this, how like this upper mid gets another little push. It's kind of like, it's not like a volume push, it's kind of like sparkle and polish in the end. The snare gets more noticeable, the vocals get clearer, even if there was some corrective EQ going on, so it gets just like, it sounds better. It's an amazing plugin. Afterwards, a final compressor that's working for the whole mix. And again here, really going conservative, really slow attack, ratio just 1.5 to 1, so it's almost no compression, just like, it's just kind of like to add this the final glue on the whole track. So you see the needle is barely moving when I bring in the song here again. So first without, and then I bring it in.
Fill their head up with magenta and gold.
So you see on the word hat, the needle was just touching the -1 dB of gain reduction. That's just the task of the compressor here. And by the way, I bypassed the compressor before I sent it into mastering, because that was the job of the mastering engineer. But before I sent the whole mix to the group, to the band, that's what I used here to kind of like add this glue. But I knew the mastering would take care of that anyway.
Fill their head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is.
Then black box again. I used this already on some parts. This for the mix bus is just magic. No high end edit here with this air band here in the bottom right. Just saturation with the alternative tube setting on. And just dial it in. Don't overthink this plugin too much. Throw it on a track on the mix bus, dial with the settings, and be happy how it sounds afterwards. So again, first without, and then I bring it in.
Fill their head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your.
Of course, now enabled again.
Fill their head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your cures.
Finally, I think it's finally, yes, that's just a trimmer in case we were peaking. Finally, again, plugin alliance plugin here. It's the mastering EQ kind of like. It's just the way how it sounds. What I did here was kind of like already acting as a mastering engineer. Just really small things here. Added a touch on 40, so really the low end. I've removed a touch at 140. This was like a little bit of build up in for the bass guitar. Adding a touch at 1 point something ish K. And adding a little bit of high end. It's kind of really like this, just we're talking about 0.5 dB, 1 dB. It's just like the mastering EQ moves. And what I did here, the stereo width, which is set to 106%. So kind of like the overall track, and I automated this effect. So in the verses, it's 100%. In the chorus, it goes a little bit to the outside. So you don't hear that much of a difference when I bring this plugin in, but it's there. So here's first without again, and then with it.
Fill it head up with magenta and gold. Fill it up until it's calm and hold. Look at my breath, it is proof of your.
So you see my computer is already working hard because I'm screen recording, talking into the microphone, capturing my video and playing this big mix. So I hope we're gonna hear the whole song. What I'm gonna do now, so we are done. This was the mix. Thanks for every one of you who's still watching. Thanks so much for watching. What I'm gonna do now in the end is that I don't play you the whole mix, but the mastered version, so my computer can rest a little bit. Thanks so much guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this whole mix through. If you have any questions about any decision I did, I will put some markers in the video so we can jump between the different chapters. Let me leave a comment below. Go to Phorm's website, go to Phorm YouTube, Spotify, download the video, the song, watch it, listen it on Spotify, buy it on Apple. Amazing band, great guys. You will help them as well, and a little bit you help me as well. So it was great to work with the guys. Thanks so much for watching again. Have a great time making music. Peace out. Bye.
your mother tonight. She could really use that heart of yours. I could be holding the fort. Go to tend to your mother, of course. Go to tend to your mother, of course. I know the dog that has fingers and longs. I know covers tend to swallow whole. I know she's stronger than rock. I know rock is not unbreakable.